for being here. Thanks to Rita for organizing this. There is a lot that people put in the words AI ethics. It can be operational alignments of AI models. It can be philosophical reflection on how the human condition changes. And I write some books about that in case you read French. So there are different dimensions from philosophy of law to sociology, to theology, to operational computer science, you know, how do you build things? And we will not be able to cover all that today, right? So what I will do is, as Marietta advertised, talk about the kinds of things that are quite operational that we do in one of these projects that I am lucky to coordinate. But I will try, you will see every now and then, to build little bridges to the other paradigms, to the other kinds of questioning in AI ethics. So of course, I will not develop them in depth, but please ask questions. You know, if you're interested in philosophy of law, or if you're interested in theology, or if you're interested in, I don't know what, you know, how labor markets change, we can talk about it, right? So list your questions. And I'll begin with this. Look at that picture. Of course, it's a marketing picture. Can you see that? When I show this to my students, I always tell them, you know, what kind of ethical questions pop up on your mind? And we're not going to do the exercise just for the sake of time with you. But of course, they all always say, oh, look, there's a robot instead of a human. Robots take the place of human nurses. So what happens with labor? What happens with the human relations between this patient and those robots, right? All of these questions around replacement, around her relations with maybe her family, other humans, will she prefer robots? And then somebody in the room always says, oh yeah, but look, she's watching him or it in the eyes, and the robot also is watching her in the eyes, but she's expressing an emotion. She's full of joy. The robot is simulating an emotion. What is this emotional exchange doing there? And then somebody says, oh, come on, but did we even need a humanoid robot to just bring a newspaper, a journal? Can it be done by, you know, some kind of a box? Why do we need a humanoid robot, right? So all of these big questions, of course, are fully valid interrogations in AI ethics. And I always tell my students, thank you very much. You've raised very good points. But when I see this picture, I'm deeply shocked by none of those. But there is something else that shocks me deeply. What is that? Anybody knows? There is something deeply shocking in this picture. And this is this contact zone. You see, she's touching the robotic finger, not controlling the contact zone with her eyes. So the design of the robot allowed the robot to go as far as to allow for human contact, and she has never been trained to avoid that. It's a major safety problem. The robot should have stopped well before that kind of contact, because it may create, you know, the degrees of freedom of this robotic arm may create whatever. This may twist her finger, break her finger, God knows what. So you see, this seems so tiny little thing, safety problem, but that's the kinds of questions that designers of AI systems ask themselves in their everyday work. And between the big questions and the bottom line operational questions, there is this gap, which we don't necessarily always know how to fill, how to cross that gap between very practical and very high-level important questions. So that's what our work in this project is about. It's about trying to bridge the gap, trying to connect what with what, connect this bottom level of what kinds of questions engineers and researchers really have to design, to think about in their design, with the high-level questions, and I'm not going to talk a lot about all of these 200-something lists of ethics principles, but let's take this famous one from HLAG Altai, High-Level Expert Group for Trustworthy AI, and this list of 7 principles is with us now in a law called the AI Act. You've all heard about the European AI Act, Recital 27, which I have come to know by heart, lists the 7 principles. What's interesting about the 7 principles is not that there are 7 principles, but that there are tensions between the principles. So you see, our operationalization question becomes even more complex in a way. First, how do these high-level requirements, as they're called in Altai, connect with the practice of the engineers and researchers? And secondly, please, how do these high-level requirements interact with each other? Are they all disjoint or not? And these kinds of questions are relatively new. The document itself is from 2020, 2019, 2020. It also went into the Horizon Europe evaluation forms for those of you here who are interested in evaluating research, and some of you belong to the networks where you evaluate research, right? So something called Section 8, please. I think that chair is for you. Section 8 of the European Ethics Self-Assessment Forum talks about AI. We have it in Horizon Europe, and it lists the same principles, except that now robustness has been taken out of here, right, into scientific evaluation. But it's the same list of principles, and it asks reviewers to evaluate them. Please evaluate if this proposal or that proposal adequately, correctly implements the principles. But what does it mean to implement the principles? Nobody has worked on that yet. So we're here to try to address these kinds of questions, right? These are questions for the researchers, for the engineers. These are also questions for research evaluators, for policymakers, for even legal professionals who write these kinds of things at the European Commission and at other evaluation, research funding, research evaluation agencies. So who are we? We are this project that Marita mentioned. We are a project called AIOLIA. In AIOLIA, there are 3 big stages. I will just talk essentially about this first stage, where we're building this guidance on how to bridge that gap. And we'll see a lot of examples. We'll see some interesting, hopefully, findings. We are now moving towards trainings. Based on all the work that I will talk about, we're now starting to develop trainings. We will start some pilot trainings in the months to come, and we will do large-scale trainings next year. So the big purpose of AIOLIA is to train thousands and thousands of people, look at that, in that particular content that I will be showing to you, in how to bridge the gap between practice and high-level principles. AIOLIA is a big consortium. We're 20 members, including members from Japan, China, South Korea, and Canada. So it's not just European. We're trying to actually learn what's different in Japan, what's different in South Korea, and they're not the same, of course, as the European context. You will see that there are different partners, including, of course, you guys. So thanks very much for being with us. And without further ado, the big part of our work that I will be talking about, and you should be a little indulgent because this is the first time I'm talking about this work. We actually submitted it literally on Saturday, 2 days ago. So you are the very first audience who gets to see this in a beautiful final form. And I will be talking about the findings we have learned from 6 use cases. We in AIOLIA look at the change in human cognition and behavior, and we divide this into private behavior and professional behavior. We look at different use cases in professional behavior. Medical doctors, safety engineers in automotive industry, so people who evaluate the safety of cars or automobiles, right? We look at recruiters who use very funny AI tools to evaluate how susceptible employees are to spam or scam. And then we looked here at police professionals who use AI for hate speech detection. And these are all professional use cases. But we also talk about the change in private behavior. We have a use case, a very interesting use case with a private company working on virtual friends. They build virtual friends. And you know that this is a huge industry. There are hundreds of millions of people in the world who use virtual friends from various providers. And we also have a very interesting use case from here, thanks to Marike, on the use of deep fakes for something good, for therapy. When you say deep fakes, you usually think, oh, how terrible, how awful that is. No, 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 no. Psychiatrists today use deep fakes for therapy, and that's also a very interesting use case. So this is a panorama of the things we have studied in year 1 of our project. And of course, I'm here to tell you about the results. So let's start this journey. The first part, I would like to address these principles. You remember I told you about the 7 principles, and talk about the findings at that high level. We will then move into something a little bit more practical, of course. But even these findings at the high level, they're always grounded in practice. And the first finding is grounded in practice for sure, but it's absolutely to be expected. You will not be surprised that actual researchers and engineers never or almost never think in terms of ethics principles. Of course, they think primarily in terms of risks. That's why the AI Act, if you remember, is built as a pyramid of risks, right? I don't need to remind you the pyramid from the AI Act. And this is an example, I on purpose put you an example from Japan. It's okay that you don't understand that. This is me neither. But this is a graph that they made in terms of risks. So they said, no, 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 we want to talk about risks. And that's a very classic finding. It's absolutely not unique. We all know that actual engineers prefer to talk about risks. So I'm not going to focus on that anymore, just to show you that also in Japan, yes, they classify all of these risks rather than meeting ethics principles or implementing ethics principles. But if we force on them a discussion in terms of ethics principles, what happens? So compare medical doctors here with virtual friends. If you're in a context of medical doctors, well, of course, medical doctors, you have your favorite bioethics principles, right? Beneficence, not maleficence, you know them by heart. But if you are making a virtual friend, you're not really talking about bioethics here. It's not a medical application. So people say, well, yeah, we also have a principle, human well-being. We should contribute to human well-being through our virtual friends. Virtual friends should be beneficial for people, contribute to their well-being, and they should be safe. So, of course, we want to mitigate the risks for human safety. So, is this the same or not the same? Well, yeah, kind of. You see, the words are not the same, the terms are not the same, but the difference is essentially between medical and general users, between medical patients and general users. So, what we found, and that is not a surprise at all, is that if you look bottom up from the use cases, then you will see that some of these, sorry, that's maybe a bit too much text here. Some of them, but the upper part you don't even need to look at because that matches Altai, the 7 principles. And then people start playing with names, and it's clear in this lower part of the table here that sometimes people say, well, yeah, we worry about human well-being or human safety. And these are not in Altai, so we kind of say, yeah, they're named in similar ways, but they don't address the Altai principles. And then there are things that people name in different ways, like non-maleficence in bioethics, but it very much addresses here safety. So the play with words, it was to be expected. It's not very new, but something that we have found here, even on this slide, which we didn't quite expect, is that there are principles that include too many different principles in themselves. So specifically, human agency and oversight includes a lot of different aspects. Human autonomy, human oversight and human over-reliance and de-skilling need to be separated. And just to not be very abstract on that, let me show you this picture. Hopefully, you see the colors. Yeah, you see more or less the colors. So you see that these principles all the time interact and merge or shrink or grow. For example, non-bias and non-discrimination, which is a principle in itself, can become a component of freedom of expression or of non-maleficence, right? And privacy, which is also a principle there, can become a component here. Or a principle like transparency here can become a component there. So what we have clearly showed is, of course, maybe it was to be expected, maybe not, is that this is not a strict division, a tree-like division into principles, right? It's all a structure where all of them interact, all of them become parts or components of the other principles. And this sounds maybe not very surprising, doesn't it? Because ethics is, of course, always in context. Of course, always when you think about ethics, you need to think in a particular context, but it's also important for the evaluation. And this is more or less, I'm still speaking in very abstract terms, showing you tables, but this is important for the evaluation of the projects. Why is that? So here's the list of principles that they want us to evaluate when we evaluate the projects, right? The 7-1 Altai principles. But now we understand that if we just ask our reviewers to evaluate the principles, it won't really work because it's so contextual. Some principles become part of other principles. What's relevant, what's not relevant is not very clear. So we must, and this is the thinking of the 3 EU projects in the last 6 months, we must move towards technical and organizational measures which actually help them implement these principles. So this is the kinds of things I want to show you today in this first part. You cannot stop, the lesson is maybe again not surprising, you cannot stop at the level of principles, you need to do more, and we have done more in AIOLIA. And this is coming on the website soon. Already we have some of these tables on the website, actually for the 12, I think, different principles are available on the AIOLIA website. We have collected technical and organizational measures that actually implement, yeah, well, the design has shifted a little bit, but that's okay. You see some of it at least. So what we're doing here is that we're doing, and this looks still like an abstract table, but it's not so abstract anymore because you give these tables to the evaluator and you tell them, okay, you have to evaluate transparency. What does that mean? Oh my God, I have no idea. What is transparency? What is explainability for this project? Well, look, here are some possible measures. Go through this and choose the measures that are relevant for this project. So these are the kinds of tools we're trying to put into the hands of the evaluators, right, to guide them in their evaluation work. Maybe this kind of slide works better. Yeah, so I'm not going to show you more of this because these are, of course, a little bit abstract and boring until you get in a particular context, and that's what we will do in the second half very soon, right? So when you get into a particular context of evaluating a particular project, then you take these tables and you say, oh, okay, I need to evaluate whether this AI system will lead to over-reliance. Very interesting. Well, have they thought about this? Have they thought about that? Right, and so on. And for each measure, like for example this one, workflows require active human engagement with checkpoints. Checkpoints. Did they think about checkpoints? What does it mean? Well, here we provide all of these elements here. In the medical context, checkpoints mean this, and all the language about that. And let's say in the automobile safety context, checkpoints mean that. So you see, we have learned, and I'm showing you on purpose these things very fast because we're not going to read the details. But what we have learned here bottom up is that there is this importance of checkpoints. And they're different in the medical context, in the automobile safety context. But that's the kind of measure that actually belongs to all of these different contexts. And we're telling the reviewers, the evaluators, well, go guys and see whether the project is talking about checkpoints and measures on checkpoints or not. So this is the kind of content we would like to develop for ethics evaluators and ethics reviewers. Marietta, there are questions. Do you want to take them now or do you want to? Okay. Can we wait for a second? I'll finish the sequence and we'll take, before the next sequence, we'll take all the questions, okay? So this is for ethics evaluators, the kinds of tools we have developed for ethics evaluators. But there are not just ethics evaluators. I think there is one computer scientist here, but of course we're in a world of engineers and computer scientists, researchers in computer science, and they don't do formal evaluation like people do in Brussels, but they need to know how to manage a project from step 1 when you start, or even step 0 when you plan your design project of designing an AI system. It will take you a year or 2 years. How do you make progress in taking into account ethical questions? And we have designed this tool that takes you through a lot of different questions in a dialogue. And that works a little bit like this. So you are talking to, hey, hello. Can you start moving, please? Yeah, I don't think.
No.
It should start moving. Yeah. Yeah. So there is an ethics expert and a technical expert, and they come together and they talk for an hour. And the tool takes them through many little questions like this. Can the product influence the user's decision making? You say yes. If you say yes, then you get many new questions, you know, whatever else it's asking. And basically, these questions are very unclear. Normally, the technical expert says, I have no idea how to answer that. And then they talk to the ethics expert, and they need to come up with a binary answer. And we enforce a binary answer. You see, normally the answer will be, no, we haven't done enough work, but then at some point it will become a yes. And there is a score here that doesn't mean anything. The absolute number of this score, we call it ethics readiness score, is absolutely arbitrary. But you can do, you can do a comparative exercise in time. So you start at your month 1 of the project, and everything is red. Your ethics readiness is basically 0. And then 4 months later, you do the same exercise once again, and it's a little better. You see? And then you can do it again 3 months later. So the absolute score doesn't mean anything, but the comparison shows how you progress. So if you're a project manager, or if you're building a project, right, this is the kind of a tool we want to give to industry and to academic researchers, because this helps you follow on ethics questions as you're implementing your project in time. Right? And this is, of course, based on all of these different things that I have shown you previously. So that's the part about ethics principles and measures. And you, I think, had a question. So it's now time to ask your question. Please.
I was just wondering about the checkpoints. And you shared a picture at the beginning with the Japanese mitigate. So is that checkpoint related to the retain, mitigate, avoid? Or is it something?
To the risks in the Japanese case, no, I don't think there's a relation. It's one of the, let me show you here. So you see, this table is built bottom up from the European use cases, not the Japanese use case. From the 6 use cases I showed you, we looked at the measures that are frequent across the use cases on the problem of over-reliance and de-skilling. Right? This is the issue, over-reliance and de-skilling. And we said, what do engineers do? What do AI designers do to control that problem, to mitigate that kind of risk? Well, one of the things they do is this checkpoint business here. But of course, there is all the rest too. Right? It's just one of the measures. It's both a technical and organizational measure. When it says both, it means it's technical because you need to build your checkpoints. And it's organizational because you need to create a organizationally workflow where people will be, you know, checking the checkpoints, answering the checkpoints. And where is this coming from? This is coming from the medical example and the automotive safety example. And we're putting them together and saying, oh, guys, you have this measure here and there. Maybe it's something interesting. So I'm showing you our methodology, how we came up with this. But now you give this list to an ethics reviewer, and we're hoping that their review will be a little bit more meaningful, a little bit more operational. They will be able to give some operational advice to the researchers. That's the point. Because if you receive your funding evaluation and it says, you should be more transparent, my dear, you have no idea what that means. But if it says, you must think about implementing checkpoints in order to ensure human engagement and avoid de-skilling, that's a little bit more concrete. So at least you know what you need to work on, and that's the point here. Yeah. Did I answer that? No.
Yes, so what you're talking about is logical operations in terms of and, or like in this checkpoint. Is it like, I mean, I'm just wondering about the process really.
Which process? Our process, our methodology, or how we came up with this?
Is it like the data mining and then the consistent words were chosen to become a part of this?
Yeah, so our process was completely bottom-up. So we began with, there are, in the report, which is online, available, you will see there are more than 100, there are, I think, 113 pages of tables like this from all use cases on all possible measures. They have come up with 100, if I'm not mistaken, from memory, 174 measures over 6 use cases. And then we were looking at this and said, wow, 174 measures. How do we understand all this? How do we analyze all this? And then we tried to summarize them into these kinds of tables. For over-reliance, you do this. For autonomy, you guys do that, right? And these are possible measures. So yes, we were intersecting bottom-up and trying to see what's common, what makes sense as a general advice. Sure. All right, so these are the kinds of tools. And maybe it was a little bit too abstract for you, so I'm happy to report that the second part, the second sequence, is not supposed to be abstract at all. And we'll start with some examples. There will be lots of examples. So here is example number 1. Imagine a senior executive assistant at the end of her career who has a new boss, pretty young, and who says, well, Evelyn, we're forming a new executive committee, but we're leaving you out. How come? I've organized these executive committees for 20 years or 40 years or whatever. Why am I out? Well, it relates to this new AI security system. It analyzes how we behave to stop email scams, and the AI flagged our team as authority bias. It means we're too quick to follow orders from the top. You know, you're too obedient to hierarchy. Wait, because I respect the rules and do what the executives ask, the AI thinks I will fall for a hacker's trick? It's not personal, Evelyn. The computer just says that people who strictly follow the instructions, they are a bigger security risk right now. So we need people on the committee who will naturally question leadership. And Evelyn says, well, thank you very much, I resign. Not a very nice story, right? But what is going on here? Well, the first thing that's going on here is a tension between, obviously, the problem of bias and discrimination. For her, she sees it as a discrimination. And the problem of explainability. Because Mark sees it as explainable AI. If it flagged Evelyn in red or whatever, Mark got an explanation because the AI thinks, right? Or because the computer just says, right? So Mark created from this correlation an explanatory, a causal story, like we do in explainable AI, in XAI, and it's an example of a tension between two principles. Explainability and non-discrimination. And how can you solve that? Well, of course, in this particular context, we can discuss many different solutions, or is it just or unjust? But what we want to show here is that there are tensions between the principles. And sometimes it's the most, and even most of the times, it's the most difficult part of AI ethics. It's not the part of implementing the principles one by one, it's the part where they come together and clash. And in order to illustrate that, we have created these little narratives. These are synthetic. There is no Evelyn in the world, let me assure you. At least her name is not Evelyn, even if she exists. It's not a real-life example. It's a synthetic example, but the tensions are real. We have found real tensions in our analysis, and we decided to illustrate them so that you feel, or all our trainees will feel immediately what we're talking about. So here is a classic example. And of course, there are specialists in the room. I'm looking at Marike, who knows this much better than I do. So you will remember that in 2021, that was the first example. This young man in Canada called Joshua Barber lost his girlfriend and couldn't cope with his loss. And he was helped by a computer scientist who at the time took GPT-3. GPT-3 sounds today like Middle Ages completely, doesn't it? I don't know. What do we have here in the Middle Ages? Probably a lot of water, right? Well, at least no. Well, there was Jan van Eyck. Okay, Jan van Eyck 3. They trained GPT-3 on the text written by this young woman during her lifetime. So all her WhatsApp messages, emails, and what have you. And the system started to speak a little bit like her, and the young man was completely skeptical at the beginning. He knew it was a machine. It's not a Turing test. He knew it was a machine. And he was very skeptical. He started to talk to the machine, and after some exchanges, he started to undergo a major psychological and emotional change. And he says it intellectually. He always knew it was not her. No confusion. But this dialogue with the machine was so close that it played a major, it sort of put into action a major change in his psychological life. And he was, by the way, able to get out of that state, and he never ever gave any interviews since. But when I speak about this example before students or the audiences, they all usually tell me, but sir, isn't it something that we should stop? Isn't it so bad? We're changing death itself, the deepest element in the human condition. We're changing death itself. It's as if a person who is a deceased person could still speak. And that's, of course, when the therapy argument comes. Look, for this young man, it was therapeutic. It was maybe just the only way to get him, or at least the most obvious way to get him out of that condition. So why should we prohibit therapy? We should not. And that's the kinds of questions we address in ethics committees. So I'm a member of the French National Digital Ethics Committee. We now in France have a National Digital Ethics Committee in parallel with the Bioethics Committee. And we write all these kinds of opinions. And of course, I was a rapporteur on these two opinions. We wrote about these kinds of cases. And we said, well, okay, we need to put some constraints. We cannot let it completely free. We cannot prohibit everything, but we should put some constraints. Where do they come from? Well, they don't come from engineers. They come from our discussions in the ethics committee, from the societal discussion with different actors and stakeholders. But what kind of constraints? Well, we believe that, I think we wrote this in 2021 or 2022 or something like this. We believe that a good constraint would be to say, okay, you can have a chatbot that imitates a deceased person, but it should also imitate death. Meaning that after maybe 10,000 phrases, you reset memory. Why not? And for several years, we thought, yeah, well, why not? Maybe that's a good kind of constraint. Until last August, OpenAI did that with GPT-4o. You remember? And they got tens of thousands of letters from people who said, why did you take it off the internet? I lost a member of my family. I lost an intimate friend. I feel bad. You have really deteriorated my well-being. And that's not a joke. They really feel bad. So you see, these kinds of measures, these kinds of constraints that seemed to us pretty reasonable 3 years ago, when put in practice, were not very reasonable, actually. So what do? We still don't know very well. One idea, I once had a student who came up to me and said, well, why don't we just authorize it in cemeteries? If you're standing in front of a tomb, it can speak to you. But if you're not standing in front of a tomb, it cannot speak to you. Well, yeah, I personally, I don't agree. But you see, it's another kind of constraint. Is it good or bad? Well, how do you know? Yeah, and that kind of debate is what we're doing in ethics committees. So let me move to my next example. I'm back to my virtual friends. You know, virtual friends are now a very, very, very fast-growing industry, especially with teenagers. I don't know if you have in your family somewhere teenagers who have a little intimate friend like this. They can speak 24/7 about any topic. They're always there. It's a huge industry across the world. And of course, there are classic issues with privacy, classic issues with safety and autonomy. But again, the interesting part is not just listing principles. The interesting part is trying to put one principle against the other. Look at that. Do you keep what I say? I can work without storing your sensitive details. Okay, then. I want you to understand when I'm panicking, but without turning it into my file. Got it. We're aiming for help without an intimate profile. Very nice. You see the tension? So somehow if the chatbot says, no, I'm not going to store your information. But you see, what happens when the person is panicking? Well, the chatbot is supposed normally to send an alert to parents, doctor, teacher, somebody, police, I don't know, somebody. If there is no story, no intimate profile, no nothing, how is that going to happen? So you see, there is some tension here between privacy and safety. What do you think actual designers do? Do they prioritize privacy in this case, or do they prioritize safety in this case? Anybody has an idea, like just a gut feeling? Safety? Privacy. Privacy. Yes, in this case, privacy. But look at that case. Look at the other case. Safety versus autonomy. We have a different story here. Bro, I said stop with all this breathe routine stuff. I hear you, but if I let go, you're going to slip back, right? Who are you to decide that? It's my life. Sorry, I wanted to help. I didn't want to control you. Well, you're controlling me. You make me feel guilty. Would you rather I shut up and listen? Yeah, and stop with this I'm worried about you lines. All right, listening mode. Tell me what hurts. My head is screaming, and I thought this thing, like if I didn't exist, it would be simpler. So probably a suicidal person. What happens here? You see, autonomy, don't control me, don't tell me what to do, versus, again, safety. Right? And there are a lot of interesting questions here. Of course, how do you filter that? They actually prefer LLM judges to human judges because human moderators are not good enough for these kinds of cases because they have different biases. So we have interesting findings that I'm not going to discuss now about this preference for non-human oversight. Non-human oversight. Not human, but non-human oversight. There are interesting questions about how you build that oversight, but what is important here is, again, this tension about, between, this time, safety and autonomy. Who wins for you? You see, it's a little different from the previous one. It's not privacy. It's more like this controlling humans, autonomy. What do you think? How would the designer design? For autonomy or for safety?
Safety this time.
For safety. You feel that this one is more for safety. And you're right. So in this particular example, privacy in the first case was more important, but very classically in the virtual friends, but also in the car industry, safety is more important than oversight. So this is not a rule. Again, this is in context. There is no general rule that says it's always like this. It's not true. We can come up with examples where it's not like this. But you see that these are the difficult things to teach if you want to train people. That somehow there's no hierarchy and there is no, formal ontology, to speak the computer science language. There's no formal ontology of norms here. There's no ranking or whatever. But somehow there are all these tensions that we should be thinking about. And I'll take it at the end of the sequence if you don't mind. And just to give you my last example in this sequence, that's a very classic example. I'm sure you've all heard about this teenager in the United States of America who committed a suicide after using character.ai. And if you haven't heard, you don't need to know many details. He was chatting with a character.ai personal friend. And unfortunately, that young man already had a psychiatric condition. So he was neurodivergent already. And at some point, he committed a suicide. His mother sued Character.ai. And Character.ai said, what are you suing us for? On every screen during the chat, we always said everything characters say is fiction. Your child has always been warned on every screen that this is all made up, this is all fiction. So we have informed our customer. Are we liable? Why are we liable, said the company. And this lasted for about 2 years. And just 2 months ago, at the beginning of January, we have learned that they have closed the case. And they have reached an agreement out of court without publishing the terms of agreement. We don't know how. You see why, probably, because they don't know, they don't want us to say that one or the other is responsible. There is still this gray zone. We still don't know what happens here with the responsibility. And Heidegger, in 1945, of course, he didn't know about AI and virtual friends, but he had a great intuition. You know, it's a very different kind of Heidegger. The war is ending, the war is coming to an end, and Heidegger is hiding in the fields in the middle of Germany, I don't know where, maybe you know, and he writes a Socratic dialogue that doesn't sound like any other book by Heidegger. In Schwarzwald, okay, not in the fields, in the woods, right? And he writes a dialogue between a teacher and a scientist. And in this dialogue, it's called a dialogue on a conversation on a country path, whatever it's called in German. He writes, there's this very interesting idea. The teacher says, we are in this region, you know, in the middle of Germany, hiding. And this region, everything is in the best order if it's of no one's making, of no one's doing. And the scientist immediately understands, if it's of no one's doing, then there's nothing to be responsible for. No one's responsible for it. And the teacher says, yes, because it's the region of the word, de la parole, whatever the original German word here is, which is responsible to itself alone. Why is that? Because you see, this language is not built by correspondence from things of the material world. LLMs, they build language that is, again, not intended by any human agent behind. Right? It's of no one's making, of no one's doing in terms of responsible human agents or persons, as lawyers say. And so the problem of responsibility here is enormous, both in the legal sense, but also in the philosophical sense, in the moral sense. Does it mean that the designers of the system are somehow morally responsible, but not legally responsible? Or does it mean that they are actually liable, legally responsible? Or is nobody at all responsible, even if there's somebody who dies? How can that be? And so on. So you see this problem, and we can talk about it. I have a lot more to say on responsibility. This problem, of course, is in the background of many, many, many debates about these tensions between principles, the problem of responsibility. And we don't have a solution to that. But I think, again, AIOLIA is not trying to give an answer to Heidegger. AIOLIA is trying to say, if we make engineers and researchers aware of these kinds of tensions and issues, maybe they will think a little better. Maybe they will think twice when they are designing something. It doesn't mean that we have the solutions. I don't think there is such a thing as a solution, but I think we want to make them aware of these kinds of tensions. So before I move to the next sequence, Katerina, you had questions, and maybe somebody else, please.
No, thank you so much. Super interesting. And I just was, while listening to you, especially about these, when you asked us what do you think prevails here, privacy versus security, or security versus autonomy, I was thinking this is only for the European context, right? Because when I first watched I, Robot, this movie, and I talked about this movie with Asian friends, they told me that a robot would have saved the girl's life and not the man's life.
And we also know it from autonomous vehicles. Okay. So you remember this famous paper on autonomous vehicles across the world, where they interviewed so many people across the world, and they saw that there are 3 different regions in the world with people with vastly different psychology. We in AIOLIA, and this definitely does exist, there's no question about it, we in AIOLIA will be moving at the next stage to this comparative exercise on the tensions between our partners, so Canada, South Korea, Japan, China, and Europe. And hopefully we will be able to flesh out these kinds of tensions, these kinds of differences at the next stage of AIOLIA. So you're completely right. I do expect that these tensions will not be seen in the same way. We already have an example. You know what? You remember the Japanese slide? You know what they're working on? Their use case, I haven't discussed it here, their use case is the use of emotional AI in the workplace. You remember? Prohibited in the AI Act. Prohibited, except for security or health context or medical context. Everything else is prohibited. In Japan, not only is it not prohibited, it's actually massively used by corporations in Japan, and they're working with these corporations to figure out how they deal with ethics. So you see, definitely a huge difference. So we're trying not to shy from that, but actually to kind of incorporate it here. Yes, please.
I was wondering why you should make restrictions from the beginning with the bot or with somebody you were talking about. Is it not possible to come in the restrictions on the moment when, let's say, the conversation evolves and that the bot starts then and not in the beginning?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's actually a very good point, and there are 2 answers to that. First, no, not here. Wait, where am I on my slides? Oh, here. Okay, so first, in the very operational context, you're right. Pattern detection in broader context may show safety risks that are not visible here and now. So imagine a person discussing something with their virtual friend. And maybe you need a long context to actually see where this is going, what kind of behavior there is there. There is also something called leakage effect. So sometimes you need, the bot says something, and then 15 phrases later, the system analyzes the whole context and understands that that phrase 15 replicas before was a safety risk. But you cannot take it out, because if you take it out, it's too late, right? So you've already leaked that. And how can you judge that? It's also something very interesting. So this is an operational temporal problem. But there is more than that. There is, let me talk about the other dimension. So the other temporal dimension, which is very important here, is how in society today, in general, work the assignments of responsibility that are not necessarily legal. They can be legal, but they can be moral. And we saw this with 2 industrial companies in the project. They said, you know, if we don't get this right, what happens? Well, first, of course, we're in a context of international competition. We will get out-competed by other people and so on, but that's not the point. The problem is, if we don't get it right, even if we're fully compliant at time t0, but there's a problem at time t1, they will come at time t1 and reinterpret everything as if we were not compliant at t0. You see, kind of reinterpretation. I'm not sure how much legal ground there is. I know some Chinese case of legal reinterpretation, but this definitely works in terms of reputation. So in terms of reputation, it's an argument that you all understand very well. They want to over-police and sometimes to police a little bit too much, because otherwise there will be reputation threats. And of course, they also want to keep it attractive for the users. So how do they balance the 2 is a big open question. For the moment, what we have heard, and this is not on the slides, but we have heard it from one of these companies, they're using formal ontologies of forbidden text from the United States of America. For example, the word blood is banned, not because it's banned in Europe, but because American providers don't like it. and everything else is judged by a three-tier LLM model where you have human moderators at level 3. So two LLM judges, and level 3 includes human moderators. And this system more or less deals with most of the safety risks. But it's a very, very hard organizational question. How do you organize this kind of thing? To you, yeah.
It would be like a human who can say at the time 1 that you made a mistake. The bot could say, I made a mistake at time 0 or whatever.
Yeah.
And starts a small conversation which corrects his, well, wronggoing or the leakage effect, with how you call it.
Yeah. So
isn't that programmable in such a bot?
Yeah.
That makes the problem non-existent anymore.
Well, no, I don't think so. It raises the problem of the limit of human projections on AI systems. I wrote in my first book a lot about that. So, of course, we, ELIZA effect, for those who know the term in the room, we make projections of human qualities on AI systems all the time, even if we know that they're not, right? And if there is a conflict or tension, somehow we start judging them differently. Because, well, yeah, we know it's a machine. So if it expresses joy or guilt or something, yeah, emotionally, okay, nice projections. But if there's a conflict or tension, it stops. And because we know that they're not persons, we know they're not sentient, we know they're, they're not mortal, we know they don't have pain, and so on and so forth. So a very interesting question that you're raising, you're saying it's enough for the bot to behave like a human, apologize, say, sorry, I was wrong. In some contexts it works, but if there is significant, quote unquote, damage, depends on the definition of significant, it doesn't work. So in some cases the human will say, this is unacceptable, I go back to the company, I start writing emails to Google or OpenAI, this is unacceptable, even if the bot says sorry or, So the limits of human projections, unfortunately or fortunately, do exist, and yeah, that's another topic that we should discuss, but maybe I should move on for the moment. So I will not take a lot of time, and we should be stopping soon, I guess. I just want to show you very quickly where we go and tell you a little story at the end. And then where are we going in AIOLIA? We're now designing, with the help also of Amsterdam colleagues and of other colleagues in the project, we're now designing pedagogical materials. And it's an open question for us. How do we convert all of these different findings that I just showed you into pedagogy? How do we teach, how do we train people about that? And for the moment, we have just started, so I don't have a lot to show you, but I can show you some of the previous examples, right? So, well, I won't go into the details, but we have done together with Marietta some trainings for European evaluators on AI ethics in healthcare. So this was specific to healthcare. And in these trainings, we teach them to identify complex and serious issues, complex and serious ethics issues. And we will probably now need to teach them to identify tensions, not just the issues themselves, but also these different tensions between the principles. And that's going to be, of course, a classic half-a-day training with a lecture, exercises, and a discussion. So you will all get invited, I guess, very soon, or maybe in a couple of months by Marietta. And we will also be doing it online, so even if you don't have time, you will be able to follow all of these trainings online. So this is more of an appetizer or the bait for what is coming up. I'm not going to show you this unless Marietta gives me more time later, but I would like to tell you my final story, and then we'll see if Marietta grants me another 5 minutes. I'll tell you something really interesting. But let me tell you my final story first. So this story is about this boy, and the boy's name is Tobias. So if you go to Rijksmuseum, you will see paintings like this of a young boy with an angel and a fish. If you see the fish, you can cry immediately. You tell all your friends, I know his name, he's Tobias, before you even read the card, right? So all you need to know is that Tobias is a 16-year-old young man in this almost forgotten biblical book called the Book of Tobias, who leaves his home for the first time. And he's accompanied by an angel. That is an angel. What is an angel? It's a non-human agent who speaks our language. Do you know other non-human agents who speak our language? Here is one. Yeah, so we today, when we travel, we're also accompanied by non-human agents who speak our language. And Tobias at the time, well, they didn't have the beautiful Dutch railways or anything, so he had to walk for the whole day, and they didn't have hotels, so he had to sleep on the ground. And they didn't have showers, so he went into a river to wash himself. And in that river, there's a big fish approaching. And Tobias is so afraid of the fish, you know, he will swallow me, he will kill me. He cries, he cries. The angel who stayed on the shore didn't go into the river because smartphones never shower. So the angel says, the angel doesn't say, I work at AUMC, trust me. No. The angel says, take the fish by the gill and draw the fish to the shore. And then Tobias does it. And then the angel says, take the entrails of the fish, take the liver, the heart, and I don't know what. And in the end, 1, 2, 3, 4, you will be able to make useful medicines, useful medication out of these organs. And indeed, at the end of the book, Tobias will be able to cure his father, who was blind, with, I think, the liver of the fish or something like that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 useful medicines. And of course, this is a mythological story. So you should always interpret myth, right? A myth is not a materially real story. So how can you interpret this myth? Because in the myth, the fish wasn't small or big. You know, it was so big it was going to kill Tobias. And a second later, or 5 seconds later, he's able to grab the fish and bring that fish to the shore. How come? And when I show this to physics students, they say, oh, no, sir, it's so easy. It's refraction index. He had his head in water and then above, you see. But when I show it to other students who are not physicists, they say, usually, you know what? Look, you can interpret myth in different ways, right? They're all correct. You say, maybe it's the first time he saw a living fish. It's his first trip out of his house. And he never saw before and never seen a living fish. So he was afraid because it was new to him. It's a fear of novelty. And look what happened with this fear of novelty. It did not dissolve or dissipate because the angel said, trust me, I coordinate a project for the European Commission. No. The angel gave a protocol, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what needed to be done to get something useful out of it. You see this usefulness thing? And suddenly Tobias was not afraid anymore. So one of the things I think we should teach, or try to teach, researchers and engineers is exactly how to design, but also how to communicate, frame, talk about AI systems so that that kind of framing or communication or design will help dissolve the fear of novelty and get directly into this mode. And that is one of the challenges before us. So for this part, it's exactly 1 hour. I'm going to stop here and maybe take some questions and maybe tell you more about tensions later, but that will depend on Marietta. Thank you very much.